Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Andrew Johnson, Part 4, Union Loyalist in Confederate Tennessee. We stopped last time late in 1860, and the big question was public opinion in the South. Would Southerners support leaving the United States and joining this new country which was being created, the Confederate States of America? And for Andrew Johnson, he was doing everything he could, doing what he did best, which was public speaking, trying to persuade the people of the South, and particularly the people of Tennessee, to remain loyal to the Union and stay in the United States and not join this Confederate new country, the Confederate States of America. On December 20th, South Carolina seceded from the Union, the first state. Other states followed in early January of 1861, and the secession movement, or support for joining the Confederacy, was growing in Tennessee. Andrew Johnson gave an anti-secession speech in the Senate on February 5, 1861. He referred to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, and Andrew Jackson. His biographer, he referred to Andrew, he said that secession was treason and a crime. His biographer, Hans L. Trefus, wrote, quote, regarding this speech, quote, "As for himself, Andrew Johnson intended to stand by the American flag, and when it should be trailed in the dust and the Union buried, he wanted, quote, no more winding sheet than that brave old flag, and no more glorious grave than to be interred in the tomb of the Union. I have an abiding confidence in the intelligence, the patriotism, and the integrity of the people, and I feel in my own heart that if this subject could be got before them, they would settle the question, and the union of these states would be preserved." So he was very much in favor of the preservation of the United States. He believed in the United States. He was very much against the southern states forming a new country. Late February, President Abraham Lincoln, or incoming President Lincoln, visited the Senate, and Andrew Johnson welcomed him. He was the only Southern senator to welcome Abraham Lincoln. On March 2nd, Andrew Johnson said, quote, "Will Tennessee ever desert the grave of him who bore it in triumph, or desert the flag he waved with success?" Talking about Andrew Jackson. "No, we were in the Union before some of these states were spoken into existence, and we intend to remain in and insist upon, as we have the confident belief we shall get all our constitutional rights and protection in the Union and under the Constitution of the country." So he was doing everything he could, really, to prevent the Civil War, and ultimately he failed, but it was certainly a noble effort. There was enormous applause for Andrew Johnson's speech in the Senate. Abraham Lincoln, the incoming president, Abraham Lincoln, was impressed by Andrew Johnson. And Andrew Johnson became the only Southern senator to remain loyal to the United States, to the Union of States. As a result, he became a virtual arbiter of patronage and government jobs in Tennessee in the coming years. In March, Andrew Johnson said, according to Hans L. Trefus, quote, "He had rather be a subject of the Russian Tsar than a citizen of the Southern Confederacy." So Tennessee was an important state, and if Tennessee could remain loyal to the Union, that would certainly be a big help to the United States. March 4th, Andrew Johnson gave a speech at the St. Charles Hotel in Washington, D.C., speaking to his supporters from New York and Pennsylvania. And he said that the people of the South did not support secession. He was receiving anti-secession letters from people in Tennessee. And he said he would, quote, "rather be a subject of the autocrat of Russia than a citizen of the Southern Confederacy." The New Orleans Daily Crescent newspaper wrote that they hoped that Andrew Johnson would go to Russia and never return. So Andrew Johnson was doing his best. Now, in his case, it was really to keep Tennessee in the Union. That was his state. In February, the Tennessee voters voted in Tennessee to remain in the Union, and Andrew Johnson's influence was a factor. However, in April, there was the firing on Fort Sumter, South Carolina, which began the Civil War, and public opinion changed in favor of secession in Tennessee. This was a dangerous time. Andrew Johnson demonstrated great personal courage and risked his life. He traveled in Tennessee giving speeches against secession. And again, he was the only senator from a southern state to remain loyal to the Union. Yeah, so the big event was the firing on Fort Sumter, the beginning of Civil War, and this, definitely affected the people all over the South to support secession and in Tennessee. There was a public meeting in Nashville, Tennessee on April 21st. A speaker referred to, quote, the traitorous conduct of Andrew Johnson. So he was being called a traitor, and this person said, hang the traitor. Tennessee Governor Isham Harris refused President Lincoln's call for troops to support the United States. After Fort Sumter, Andrew Johnson made a dangerous trip home. He was supporting the Union in Tennessee, and he almost didn't make it home, traveling from Washington, D.C. to Greenville, Tennessee. At Lynchburg, Tennessee, there was an angry mob that invaded his car at the train station, and a ruffian pulled his nose. Somebody grabbed him by the nose with his forefinger and second finger and twisted, which is a very insulting thing and provocative thing. Andrew Johnson defended himself with a pistol. Railroad officials calmed the crowd, and the train proceeded and allowed Andrew Johnson to continue on his trip home. Again, the April 12th Confederate shelling of Fort Sumter, South Carolina, led President Lincoln to call for 75,000 troops. Tennessee secessionists were animated, and Andrew Johnson was determined to fight secessionists in Tennessee. April 21st, he was returning to Tennessee, again in Lynchburg, Virginia. A big crowd there. He was in danger. William Hardwick, the editor of the Lynchburg Republican newspaper, a secession leader, was there. He got to Bristol. He was riding the Bristol, Virginia-Tennessee line, and there's another dangerous mob almost lynched Andrew Johnson. Jefferson Davis intervened. He did not want Andrew Johnson to become a martyr, ordered the train to continue. So he did make it home to Greenville, where the Confederate flag was flying. He gained strength from his family, and he hoped that eastern Tennessee would remain loyal to the Union. Andrew Johnson gave us, on April 27th, a speech in Knoxville invoking the spirit of Andrew Jackson. There were Confederate soldiers there listening. However, trouble was avoided, and nothing happened. Now, Andrew was a Democrat. The Whigs were supporting him at this time in his efforts. So April 27th, he was in Knoxville. A big crowd of supporters cheering him in Knoxville because eastern Tennessee was generally loyal. Biographer Gary Bullard wrote, quote, Andrew Johnson's pro-unionism was as courageous and steadfast as anything that Tennessee icon named Andrew Jackson had ever done. So this was really a heroic moment in the life of Andrew Johnson, what he was doing here, his tremendous courage. Again, April 27th in Knoxville, Andrew Johnson gave a speech against the Confederacy. He called secession. He said secession would lead to anarchy, the formation of petty little governments with a little prince in one, a little potentate in another, and a republic somewhere else. In eastern Tennessee, Democrats and Whigs were cooperating to support the war. So his region of Tennessee was loyal to the Union. Not the whole state, though. On May 7th, the Tennessee legislature voted to join the Confederate States of America. On June 8th, there was a public referendum, and the public voted in support of joining the Confederacy. Andrew Johnson continued his dangerous speaking tour in support of the Union. In Elizabethtown, Tennessee, Andrew Johnson called secession or compared secession to the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And he said, quote, they, quote, seceded and retired from the enjoyments that had been placed before them. Late May, there was a Union convention in Knoxville, and June 8th, the public had voted to support secession. Eastern Tennessee did not support secession, and the vote was 33,000 to 15,000 in favor of the Union in Eastern Tennessee. Oliver P. Temple said, quote, nothing in the whole history of Andrew Johnson shows so strikingly as this canvass the dominating power he held over the minds of his party in the section where he lived. As a result of the election and the decision for Tennessee to join the Confederacy, it became impossible for Andrew Johnson to stay in Tennessee. Confederates were angry with him for his pro-Union public stand, and they vowed to kill him on sight. His life was in danger during this time and the coming years. Andrew Johnson said that Judas betrayed Jesus through suicide, and he said, quote, he also seceded to put an end to his existence. In Jonesboro, Tennessee, Andrew Johnson gave a speech. The crowd booed him and called him a damn traitor. And in Athens, Tennessee, there he spoke before an infuriated mob. His life was in danger. There were reports that Confederate soldiers would kill Andrew Johnson on the train to Knoxville. He took back roads to return to his home in Greenville. Again, June 8th was the big day when the Tennessee referendum supporting Tennessee's secession. Andrew's life was in danger in Tennessee, so he needed to leave and return to Washington, D.C. He left in the middle of the day. He took a carriage on the public dirt road, the Cumberland Gap. He was fearless. And on his trip, he arrived in Covington, Kentucky, where he was received as a courageous freedom fighter. In Cincinnati, Ohio, thousands of people lined the sides of the street to cheer him. Andrew Johnson described himself as, quote, a fugitive from tyranny, a fugitive from the reign of terror. So it was dangerous for him to travel in the middle and west of Tennessee, so he needed to leave. The direct route was dangerous, so he took this Cumberland Gap, left on June 12th, was almost arrested at Bean Station, and he did not see his hometown of Greenville for 8 years. All of Tennessee would soon be occupied by Confederate troops, and Unionists in Tennessee would be persecuted. There was a bitter civil war in Tennessee between Unionists and Confederate supporters. Andrew's family was in danger in Greenville, and they were permitted to cross the lines and join Andrew Johnson in Washington, D.C., his wife and children. Andrew gave a speech in Lexington, Kentucky. He condemned secession, and then, of course, the speech in Cincinnati. He arrived in Washington, D.C., June 21st. He was a hero there. The 25th Pennsylvania Regimental Band serenaded him at his hotel. Again, Andrew was the only senator from a state that seceded to remain loyal. And he asked President Lincoln to help the Unionists in eastern Tennessee. So this was really something. Again, he arrived in Washington, June 21st, staying at the St. Charles Hotel. The band from the 25th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment and a group of Northern admirers hoped he would appear, and he spoke to them. He met with President Lincoln, and Lincoln saw that Andrew Johnson was serious in fighting the Confederates in Tennessee. And this is when Andrew became famous in the North and popular in the North for his support for the Union, and really hated in the South for the same reason. By July, Confederates controlled Greenville, his hometown in Tennessee. They seized Andrew Johnson's Main Street house, used for a military hospital. They forced Eliza, who was in bad health, to leave. Andrew's daughter Mary and her husband Daniel Stover spearheaded the Union 4th Tennessee Volunteer Infantry Regiment, mostly displaced eastern Tennesseans. On July 6th, Andrew Johnson gave a speech in the Senate. This was important. Days earlier, the Union Army lost the Battle of Bull Run, Virginia. 25 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. Andrew Johnson was happy about the absence of Jefferson Davis, whom he really disliked, who was now the president of the Confederacy. Andrew had this to say about the war, U.S. Civil War, quote, "Whether the people shall have a government based upon their intelligence, upon their integrity, upon their purity of character, sufficient to govern themselves." Tennessee Representative Thomas Nelson had been a Unionist. He advised the people of eastern Tennessee to stop their resistance to Confederate authorities. Earlier, he had been arrested and decided to submit. Andrew Johnson said this about Nelson's statement: "I would rather be screwed down in my coffin and buried in the earth." Andrew had this to say about the stifled Union support in Tennessee, those who still supported the Union but had to keep quiet. He compared them, he said they were like the, quote, "smothered fires of Vesuvius, which only fall to gather more lava and more heat before the time when they may burst forth with more destructive fury." Nice reference to the Italian volcano. Andrews had this to say about the people of Tennessee: "The people there are a brave people. I love them." He always gave credit to the people of Tennessee for his success. Again, July 21st was a tough time because the Union was defeated at Bull Run, Virginia. Confederate troops were within sight of Washington, D.C. Kentucky had declared neutrality. These were dark days. However, Andrew Johnson did not lose faith in the United States. On July 27th, he gave a 3-hour speech in the Senate in support of special war powers for the president. Andrew said that the war was a test of the government's ability to maintain itself, and he said that there was open talk of monarchy in the South. Andrew Johnson said, quote, "We should show to the nations of the earth that we are a nation capable of preserving our existence." In the fall of 1861, Unionists in eastern Tennessee attacked 9 bridges, destroying 5, and there were a number of arrests. 4 men executed and hung within the vicinity of those bridges. Andrew Johnson called the people of eastern Tennessee, quote, "oppressed and pursued as beasts." These Loyalists in eastern Tennessee. Andrew Johnson introduced a resolution in the Senate in which he said, quote, "The present deplorable civil war has been forced upon the country by the disunionists of the southern states, now in revolt against the constitutional government. This war is not prosecuted upon our part in any spirit of oppression, nor for any purpose of conquest or subjugation, nor for the purpose of overthrowing or interfering with the rights of established institutions of those states, but to defend and maintain the supremacy of the Constitution and to preserve the Union. As soon as these objects are accomplished, the war ought to cease." The next 2 months, Andrew Johnson traveled in Ohio and Kentucky, giving speeches in support of the Union. Congress was on recess. He could not go home. He did not have a home to go to. He could not go to Greenville. He was supporting the Unionists and comforting the Tennessee expatriates, Unionists from eastern Tennessee who had to leave Tennessee and were in Ohio and Kentucky. Andrew was optimistic about Tennessee. He was popular in the North and was the man of the hour. It's important to keep in mind when you're going to judge this man. He was, 1861, he was a fugitive, a refugee. The Unionists of eastern Tennessee were being hounded, harassed, imprisoned, and killed. Andrew Johnson was communicating that the U.S. government needed to help the people of eastern Tennessee. He was in despair about this. No U.S. troops were available to come to free eastern Tennessee from Confederate rule. Again, Congress had adjourned. Andrew could not go home. The Unionists of eastern Tennessee were fleeing into Kentucky. They were in trouble in eastern Tennessee. His family was considered alien enemies. There was action taken to seize his property. His son Robert was in hiding. Andrew toured Kentucky and Ohio. He was given special authority by the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, approving disbursements to protect Unionists in the Confederacy. Again, he continued doing what he was best at, giving speeches, in this case, standing by the Union, saying that he had an unshakable conviction that victory would be achieved by the United States in the war, that the Union would win and the Confederacy defeated, and the country maintained as one country. Andrew was in Cincinnati and Columbus, Ohio, giving speeches to large crowds. He encouraged the U.S. Army to invade Tennessee, although the time had not yet come for that. Andrew was angry about this. He was an impatient man and returned to Washington, D.C. He wanted eastern Tennessee to be liberated. He talked about the resistance to the aristocratic usurpers. Eastern Tennessee Unionists were oppressed and pursued as beasts of the forest, he said. Andrew disliked General George McClellan for his failure to invade eastern Tennessee and liberate it. January of 1862, he was impatient and regarding General McClellan, and President Lincoln was pressuring General Buell for arms for eastern Tennessee. President Lincoln liked Andrew Johnson for his determination and interest in action. He compared him to Generals Buell and McClellan, who were really not active. He said that Andrew Johnson had the heart of a warrior. His life had been threatened in Tennessee, his family dispersed, his property seized. Andrew Johnson was a tragic and brave man at this time. However, early in the spring of 1862, there were Union victories at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, Tennessee, and the Union invaded the middle and western part of Tennessee and captured Nashville, the capital. However, eastern Tennessee still remained in Confederate hands. Andrew was appointed military governor of Tennessee. On April 22nd, Andrew read a resolution reading George Washington's farewell address, which he felt was relevant. So he was leaving the Senate to go to Tennessee to be the military governor. He had proved his loyalty to the Union. Again, Fort Donelson, Tennessee, this was a major Union victory. 15,000 Confederate soldiers surrendered, and the door was open to capture Nashville, 80 miles southeast. On February 23rd, the Confederates withdrew from Nashville. Union General Buell had the job of managing a chaotic Tennessee. There was also a Union victory at Shiloh in southwestern Tennessee. President Lincoln wanted to restore order in Tennessee. On March 3rd, Andrew Johnson was informed that he would be appointed military governor of Tennessee. Again, February of 1862, as we said, the Union Army recaptured was on the offensive, and President Lincoln decided to appoint military governors. And the first was Andrew Johnson for Tennessee on March 4th. The Senate confirmed that. Also, he was appointed a brigadier general. Now, his appointment as governor of Tennessee was controversial because, of course, he was kind of could be a difficult person. And people thought, well, maybe he's like too difficult. And this was a real challenging situation ruling Tennessee during the Civil War. He wanted to help the Tennessee Unionists, and there was creating this provisional government for Tennessee. March 4th, Andrew became the first military governor of a conquered Confederate state, and one of the things he did was he demanded loyalty oaths in Tennessee. The Nashville Mayor Richard Cheatham refused and was arrested, and then later agreed. So Andrew left Washington, D.C., took a train to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, then Cincinnati, Ohio, arrived in Nashville March 11th. He was not received with enthusiasm from the public in Nashville. Unionists were cowed in Nashville. The secessionists were in the majority. There was hostility to Andrew Johnson and sullen submission to his authority. Andrew Johnson was undaunted and firmly took control and gave a speech to this hostile crowd in Nashville shortly after arriving. He said, quote, "I come with the olive branch in one hand and the Constitution in the other. to render you whatever aid may be in my power in re-erecting the Star-Spangled Banner. So March 11th, he arrived in Nashville, Tennessee, which would be his home for the next 3 years. He received hate mail from Tennesseans, or Confederate supporters, calling him a traitor, scum, and vile, and a wretch. Andrew wrote a letter to his wife and said, quote, I feel sometimes like giving up in despair, but this I will not do. We must hold out to the end. This rebellion is wrong and must be put down, let cost what it may in life and treasure. I intend to appropriate the rest of my life to the redemption of my adopted home, Eastern Tennessee, and you and Mary must not be weary. It is our fate, and we shall be willing to bear it cheerfully. Impatience and dissatisfaction will not better it or shorten the time of our suffering. So Andrew Johnson was commissioned as a brigadier general. He basically was dictator of Tennessee. He had the power to censor newspapers, seize property, organize courts, schedule elections, arrest anyone he wanted to arrest. And, of course, he was this strong Unionist determined to destroy Confederate support in Tennessee. Andrew knew Tennessee. He knew Nashville. He'd spent 10 years there as a Nashville representative and a state senator and governor. He knew who was a Union supporter and who was a Confederate supporter. One of the things he did, he pardoned young Confederate soldiers who had been pressured to join the Confederate Army. He wanted to make things work, reach out to diverse factions, wipe the slate clean with young Confederates. He believed that young poor men had been pressured to join the Confederate Army by older rich men. The Nashville, Tennessee residents were rattled. They feared a Union assault or the return of the Confederate Army. A lot of confusion and fear. Now, one of his trademarks, he kept saying that traitors must be punished and treason crushed. These were difficult years for Andrew Johnson in Nashville. On March 17th, he seized the Bank of Tennessee, which he had proof was supporting the secession and was aristocratic. He closed hostile newspapers. He appointed Unionists to prominent positions. He made assessments of wealthy secessionists supporting the wives and children of Union soldiers. Now, General Buell, the Union general, was lenient or considered lenient and wanted to soften the people, win them over. Andrew had this appearance of being strict, at least on the outside, and some people thought, well, he was increasing support for the Confederacy by being too hard on people. It was all debatable. Nashville, Tennessee, the people were hostile to the U.S. government, and some thought that Andrew was too harsh on them. A large portion of the population was undecided and would support the winning side, and of course they didn't know who was going to win. It was dangerous. The Confederate Army could return. Union sentiment was weak. In April, General Grant won the Battle of Shiloh on the Tennessee River. Nashville was in danger throughout this time, where there were constant hostile raids. Andrew wanted to raise Union troops in Tennessee. In April, he had 2 regiments ready for Union supporters, 4 more almost ready. He was a maverick and clashed with Union military leaders. He had conflicts with Union generals. He did have better relations with General Rosecrans, but he had a consistent inability to get along with Union generals. Andrew was giving speeches encouraging Union troops and forces. Again, this was his strong point, giving speeches. He lived at the St. Cloud's Hotel. Several weeks later, moved to a large house on Cedar Street in Nashville, 1 block from the Capitol. The Capitol in Nashville of Tennessee was called Fort Johnson. Fort Andrew Johnson. There were cotton bales, earthworks, and cannons because it was war, and Nashville was threatened by a Confederate retakeover. On March 8th, Andrew Johnson published a 1,200-word appeal to the people of Tennessee. He invited every citizen of Tennessee, quote, regardless of, quote, party affiliations, or past political opinion or action to join him in restoring law and order in Tennessee. This was a message of conciliation. He offered full amnesty, offered on the condition that people would yield to his authority. This appeal was printed on posters, flyers, and newspapers across Tennessee. Andrew knew that the Bank of Tennessee, its leadership, they were Confederate supporters, and so he seized the bank. The bank had continued to honor Confederate currency. He asked for a Union loyalty oath from the City Council of Nashville. They refused, and he dismissed the Nashville City Council. The Nashville City Council had continued to support the Confederacy. He ordered the arrest of George Barber, the Nashville Republican Banner newspaper editor. Barber was, as a result of his arrest, was converted to the Union cause. Andrew supported the Nashville Daily Union newspaper, which was used to promote the Union and the cause of the United States in the American Civil War. Andrew learned that Nashville ministers were promoting the Confederate cause from their pulpits on Sunday morning church services. He called a meeting of these Nashville ministers in his office, and he told them they needed to take a loyalty oath to the United States. They refused, and he ordered them arrested. He was working for a prisoner exchange, trying to bring Confederates from the North with Unionists from the South with little success. He was frustrated by this and haunted by it. Andrew's actions solidified Union support in Tennessee. He was effective. And now General Buell's opinion about Andrew Johnson, according to biographer Gary Boulard, he called him, quote, a prattling idiot whose knowledge of military strategy was less than zero. So you can see this major conflict he had with Union generals. Andrew said that the vast majority of Southern white people, or European descent Americans, were not enemies of the Union, but victims of the Confederacy. By July 4th, he gave a speech in Nashville, and public opinion had changed. The crowd cheered him, and he challenged Confederate women. There's a story that a hotel keeper's daughter, Laura Carter, was arrested for spitting at a federal officer. Laura was defiant and said she would dance on Andrew Johnson's grave. Andrew heard about this and he said, quote, "Oh, you mustn't mind these little rebels. There's no harm in Laura. Dance on my grave, will she? She will plant flowers instead." Well, that concludes today's presentation. We'll continue next time with Part 5 of the fascinating life of Andrew Johnson and his efforts, his heroic, noble efforts during the Civil War for the United States to win the war and keep the United States one country. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.